Okay, so Apple just had their latest keynote address, and I'm just going to give my thoughts on this. This is from the perspective of someone who has loved to watch Apple keynote addresses for many years, like the past 2 decades, basically. Jeez. Um, and I made a video recently just about some of my frustrations with just the 8 gigabyte memory in the Mac Mini and some of the Apple computers that I think that needs to be bumped up by quite a bit. But that's not what today's keynote address was about. Today's keynote address surrounded the Apple Watch as well as the new iPhone 15. And they also dedicated a significant amount of time to sustainability and using or sort of meeting their goals of being carbon neutral by 2030. So they spent a lot of time on that. Generally speaking, the keynote addresses changed dramatically once the lockdowns occurred, because instead of doing these keynote addresses in front of an audience, a live audience, they started doing these pre-recorded, pre-taped keynote addresses, which are quite different. There's a lot more, obviously, like polish to them, I suppose, or just like, because they have it's not live, so they can retake any of these speeches, any parts of the presentation as much as they want. They can re-record them until they get them to be perfect in their minds, and so it does change the vibe of the keynote addresses quite a bit. I do quite miss the live keynotes because there's something to be said for like live audience participation. And one of the things is that I think the companies are missing without doing live presentations is to get immediate feedback. Sometimes there's features that get a larger amount of applause that are unexpected. And then there's features that don't really get much of applause that the company thought were like this great thing. So there is this just like, it's not just that, but there's also a bit of magic in terms of even when presenters make mistakes, it just shows that they're more human and more grounded, and there's just more of, I think, a connection with the audience that way. But Apple is such a big company at this point. They've become, such a behemoth that it's like, I don't fault them for doing it the way that they do it. It gives them certainly a much more control over the keynote address itself, and they can edit and re-edit as much as they need to before going live, and sort of shield themselves from some of the potential issues that could come up with doing something live. But again, I think it's a give and take, obviously. Personally, I do miss the live keynotes, but in terms of high production value, the keynote addresses from Apple are the best that you're going to get. So I guess I'm like sort of conflicted between the sort of pre-recorded versus the live keynote addresses. I do miss the live ones. With this pre-recorded stuff, they put in these segments where they pump up the music, and sort of they try to increase the pacing and excitement of the keynote in different ways. And certainly like the environments that they shoot these segments in are gorgeous, and it's a thing. So anyways, just like based on like just a keynote, first of all, I would say, it wasn't bad, right? I mean, it was sort of typical Apple keynote. They started out with this emotional connection about people whose lives have been saved by the Apple Watch. And they used this song that's like really popular song on social media That sort of thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain song, which I feel like is just a little bit like it's a little overused. So for them to use that song, like, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like they could have maybe picked a different song just because of everybody already knows this song, you know? So I don't know. It's for me personally, it was a little like redundant. Plus, like it's like one chorus line that just continues to repeat the way that they shot that segment over and over and over again, and it is what it is. So yeah, I mean, basically, in this, a lot of, like I said, was focused on the Apple Watch. So let's take a look at that. And so we're up to the Series 9 now. There's no visual difference between the Series 9 and previous Apple Watches in terms of like the size or shape of the Apple Watch, which I think is fine. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. People are familiar with it. People who have Apple Watches have existing watch bands. They want to continue to use those bands that they like and purchase new ones and mix and match, and so it's fine that there was no visual differences. I don't have any issues with that at all. They talked about, again, like a lot of sustainability, so there were Apple Watch bands as well as leather, as well as cases for the iPhones. That basically the Apple's like not going to use leather anymore. So there's not going to be any leather products, but there's also this. I guess the bands are using more recyclable material, which is also fine. There's some new sensors in this watch, and basically, like, you can use a tap feature. You can tap your pointer finger and your thumb together twice, and the watch can pick up on that gesture. And so it's fine. I mean, there's really nothing. It's just a good update to the Apple Watch. So if you already have an Apple Watch, is it a reason to upgrade? It really depends on what Apple Watch you have. I'm trying to think of what Apple Watch I have. I think it's the Series 7. So for me, it's, there's, unless I wanted this little double tap feature where it's hands free and you just tap your fingers together twice, which is a very compelling feature, like super compelling. It's something I would definitely use if it works well. Of course, I would worry about false positives, like if I'm just like, I don't know, tapping my fingers somehow, if it's gonna accidentally cause a tap. I guess we'll have to wait and see how that is in use, but I tend to think it's probably fine. I don't know. Because I imagine you probably have to be like looking at the watch at the same time when you do the double tap. So that might be obviously not going to see what you're looking at, but just the orientation of the watch, where it wakes up. So that's big. Otherwise, like from my perspective, I mean, it's just just an incremental update, which is what Apple does, which is fine. There's nothing wrong here. Price wise, I think it's pretty much the same price as the previous models, and it's fine. It's fine. No issues there. There was also the Apple Watch Ultra, which is now the Apple Watch Ultra 2. And I don't know if they lowered the price or not, or if this is the same. I never had a Apple Watch Ultra. But I mean, this is for like, if you're doing some like serious like outdoor adventures or diving and things like that. So this is personally not something that I'm looking at. I guess maybe the Titanium is a little more robust, so that's a thing for some people. But for me, this is not. Certainly I have nothing against the product. It's just not for me. But I do enjoy my Apple Watch. And then the last part of this was it's just about the iPhone. So essentially, the iPhone 15 is out now. There is a Pro version and a normal version. So we'll just talk about, I guess, the normal version first. I mean, it's nice to see that they're continuing on with the iPhone SE, but there was no updates to the iPhone SE that were announced. For me personally, I still love that home button. Like, I'm still not a fan of Face ID. Touch ID to me just makes a lot more sense. And I would love for someone to explain to me why or how Face ID is any more secure. It seems to me like Face ID is way less secure than a Touch ID. Simply because, like, if you have your phone sitting on a table, if someone was to just grab that phone, your phone, and then point it at you, to me, there's a likelihood that would just unlock the phone with Face ID, and then the person could just run off with your phone that's unlocked. So like there's circumstance, or if you're hanging out with someone, they could just grab your phone and do the same thing, kind of sort of point it at you, and if you look at the phone, it's gonna unlock. So to me, Face ID just seems like super insecure. Just super, super insecure. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. To me, it's like it causes them to also continue to keep a camera cutout on the front of the device. And I think the most beautiful possible device would be one where you don't see any cutouts on the screen at all. So we're still stuck with this dynamic island, which is now in all of the iPhone 15 models. There is no Touch ID. I had a sort of somewhat hoping that maybe one of the buttons on the side of the iPhone would have Touch ID like it does in one of the iPad models, but that's not the case. So if it did have Touch ID, I would be buying the iPhone 15 right away. It does not, so to me that's a big disappointment. Most people have already moved on to using Face ID, or they simply just use they literally enter their password every single time they use their phone. I know people like that. So Touch ID Face ID is still just not where it's at, in my opinion. So for me, none of these phones really work, because the iPhone SE has the Touch ID, which is great, but it's a smaller screen. For me, the iPhone 8 Plus is the latest iPhone that I can really use effectively, because it has a larger screen and it has Touch ID also. And so there's no option really for me in this lineup of phones. But if I was to look at the iPhone 15, I mean, the starting price, I guess, is not terrible. Let's just take a look at the pricing here. There is a standard model and then a plus model. For me personally, I'm more of the plus size screen person. So the other part of it is they changed how the colors are so infused in this glass back. If you're like me or like most people, you're just going to use a case anyways. So whatever. I would just choose the black version. It's nice that they're starting out at least with a 128 gigabytes as a standard, which is still in the realm of reasonable standard for minimum storage. You can go up, but we're still talking about $1,000 for new phones. There's not. iPhone prices have steadily increased, so for folks who are looking at maybe saving a little bit of money, they can look at the 14. Not a huge cost savings, but a little less expensive. Um, you know, basically, this is all about like internal technology, right? Which is normal for iPhones. Instead of the A15 Bionic chip, we now have an A16, and for the Pro model, there's a A17 Pro chip that has a 6 core GPU, which is sort of interesting because it does open up some possibilities for gaming. And the other thing I have, well, sorry, just real quick, and then the cameras are just more megapixels to the cameras, and there's some software features that make photos better, but just typically something that's talked about every single keynote address. They did show basically some console games running on the Pro model of the iPhone, which was quite interesting. But my only question was, can I then dock the iPhone 15 Pro to my TV? Right? It's USB-C now, which is the other big thing. So it's like, is there a USB-C to HDMI? Or simply like a USB-C to USB-C? Because a lot of monitors now are Thunderbolt or USB-C. Like, can I dock this iPhone 15 Pro to a television or monitor? If they had showed that off, that to me would have been a killer feature. Like, that would have been incredible. And maybe that's a feature, maybe not, but that was definitely not discussed. So I'm confused about that. I don't know if we can do that. Can we dock the iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max to, which are both, again, looks like they're 128 gigs starting out, but the Pro, I think, or Pro Max, sorry, starts out at 256 in terms of storage, which is, I guess, makes more sense for a Pro version. But if you're using like this Pro Max version for photography and videography, then you're probably going to want to do 512 or a terabyte. So this is not a cheap phone. But they said something about being able to use an external storage. So basically using the USB-C, I guess you can connect to an external hard drive and record directly to external hard drive. So that's kind of interesting. So that could maybe be a potential solution for some folks. But I really was curious about, like, can I dock this iPhone into a larger monitor? Like, there used to be a USB-C. Was it USB-C? Sorry. It was Lightning to HDMI. And there it is right there. So Lightning cable on one side, on the other side HDMI, and then power as well. So basically you can connect this to a TV or any HDMI monitor, and you could also power your iPhone at the same time. So this is an adapter that I've bought many times. I do own it, I do use it, and it's a very useful device, useful dongle. The only issue with these things is the cable often ends up getting discolored, and it's just not very what's the word? It they go bad. I had to replace them several times actually because of that. Because when you have the power going through this cable, I don't think the cable can really handle the power, and it overheats. So it's a thing. But I still use this with my phone to this day. And so the idea would be that you could have just the USB-C cable or Lightning or what a cable or whatever and dock your phone. Well, I don't know if that's possible. So it's something now I have to research, and I'm kind of feeling like maybe the answer is just no, because they didn't show it off, and I don't know why they wouldn't show it off if that's something that you can do with really any of these iPhone 15s. So for me, it's as someone who has an iPhone 8 Plus, which is the largest screen and the latest model of the iPhone with Touch ID. It's like, would I upgrade and get the iPhone 15? Well, there's a couple issues, right? Like, I assume that they didn't say this, but I assume all of these have eSIM, like the iPhone 14 did. So if you travel and you take SIM cards out or in, like, that's a thing. But I guess eSIMs are fairly user friendly in terms of switching carriers or whatever. So I don't think that's like a huge issue with the eSIM. It does have, like, they switched the silent switch to a multi-use button. That was like one of the big things. I don't know. It's fine. We'll see how people like it. I don't. It enables, like, you to use the button for more than one thing. So in order to mute your phone, you have to hold that multi-use button down until it mutes it, and then do the same to unmute. But then you can tap on the button to get additional quick actions. So I don't know. We'll have to see, like, in use how that is. If people enjoy it or not. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not sold on upgrading. Like, I still really enjoy my phone. Some people would say, well, you get a much larger screen with these devices, but that dynamic island I'm just not a fan of. Or just like cutouts on the front of phones. I'm just not a fan of them because I don't take selfies. So for me, like, it would be very, very rare that I would actually use a front-facing camera. Like, super, super rare. I just don't do it. So I'm not a selfie person. I think a lot of people are. I guess a lot of people just grow up on social media, so they're just used to taking selfies. I'm just not one of those people. So I don't really like the dynamic island because it's just like it's just a camera constantly pointing at you every time you're looking at your phone, which is like, something you can cover up if you have like an iPhone SE or 8 Plus or one of these Touch ID versions. And I'm not even sure if that's possible with this Pro model. I'm sure somebody makes like a little sticker or something, but I don't know. Like I said, like, the gaming thing was almost compelling and interesting, except they didn't show whether it could connect to a TV or not. If you could use this connected to a TV and I can play console level games on my phone through a TV or monitor, then that's a huge selling point. Huge selling point. Huge. But I don't know if it does it. I mean, that's basically it. Like, I sort of go back and forth about the keynotes, about, like, how super corporate they are. Like, they're very, very, very controlled. Like, everyone has a huge smile on their face the whole time. Everybody's, like, uber excited. All the presenters are uber excited. And it partly comes across a little disingenuous. It comes across a little fake to me, that they're so cheery and happy about everything. Which is something that comes, I think, along also with, like, the pre-recorded nature, but that also was, it can happen live as well. I mean, I think the CEO is kind of like, he definitely has that vibe of, like, how he presents. Like, he just generally feels like he's not really comfortable speaking in front of people, but he's learned how to do it, and that comes across. So, but it just, I don't know, it's just the culture and sort of vibe of these keynotes. It just seems like to me there's a gap in the marketplace for another company to just have a different vibe to them. You know, like the Apple vibe is so, it's like so controlled. Like it's like controlled to the point where you're like waiting for somebody to like freak out. You know what I mean? like like I wonder if anyone like during one of these pre-recorded segments has just like flipped out because they're just like they can't keep smiling anymore. Like they just, you know, it's just like it feels like a pressure cooker. Is kind of how it comes across. You know, it's not, it depends on the presenter, and everyone's got a little different vibe, but so that's basically it. I mean, like for me, I've talked about like the Mac Mini. I was frustrated about only 8 GB of memory, um, which of RAM, you know, which I don't find acceptable. So I'm a little frustrated on the Mac Mini side. We still don't have Touch ID back. It doesn't look like we will ever get Touch ID back, which is really frustrating and sort of defeating to me personally. I don't want to have to enter a password every single time I use my phone, and I also don't want to use Face ID. So I don't know. That's like a losing battle that I'm fighting here. You know, it's like, I don't know. This is my only option right now. In terms of like a new phone. Luckily, the 8 Plus still works. You can still buy them. It works fine. I've seen comparison videos between that and the iPhone 12, and it's like, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of difference to me. Yeah, so for me, it's like, the one sort of reason I think that these Pro models make a lot of sense is if you are doing content creation, if you are doing photography or videography, these iPhone 15s or just the iPhone Pro models in general are very compelling. They are. It's getting to the point where, like, I have a like proper camera, you know, like a nice Sony camera that's pro level camera, and it's like it's getting harder and harder to differentiate the video and photo quality between like a Sony camera like the A7 III or A7 IV and just an iPhone Pro camera. I mean, they spent a lot of time talking about those photography and videography for a reason. You can now record into 60 frames a second in 4K with this thing. So if I was focused on photography and videography, I would say like this is probably worth it. And you could justify it more, I suppose, because it's like half the price of like a Sony camera, depending on which model you're looking at. So I thought about that for a while. Like I thought about getting into like photography and videography, and so I do have like a little bit of a regret that I didn't focus on that. Like if I had been able to focus on just doing that and nothing else, sticking with the iPhone and always sticking with the Pro models would have made sense. I could have, create good content, and then you can use the iPad Pro to do video editing with, and the fact that they now have USB-C on both the iPad Pro, and now this is new. Both the iPad Pro and the iPhone, so I assume like you could basically connect your iPhone directly to your iPad and transfer photos. Of course, you can also use iCloud, which they now have more storage available on the iCloud plans. I don't know the prices on those, but I had an iPad Pro 12.9 inch. It was not the M versions, so it had Lightning port, so I couldn't connect my Sony camera directly to the iPad, which made it difficult in terms of transferring files. I had to transfer files from the camera like to an external hard drive that had Wi-Fi in it, and then to the iPad, which was frustratingly long, and that's probably why I wasn't quite successful doing that. So if I was to jump back in, I would say I would probably do like a Pro model of the iPhone and then a Pro iPad 12.9 inch. The other thing about the 12.9 inch iPad that was unbelievably amazing was that you could, and I actually had a 12 gigabyte model, was that they had an app called Comixology that was like reading a comic in full size on this thing. It was a glorious experience. But then Comixology was purchased by Amazon, and they just destroyed that application, like ran it into the ground. So, so one of the major reasons of having this iPad Pro, it was basically video editing, photography, and reading comics. Like that one reading the comics piece just, it was a killer. It was just so frustrating. So I ended up getting rid of my iPad Pro for those reasons. No USB-C, difficulty transferring files to it, and just time consuming, and that Comixology app. So it would be quite an investment to jump back in. If I was to jump back in for photography / videography, like recording video on the iPhone and then editing it on the iPad. It certainly is great for like digital nomad life, but I would be looking at, just to get the same storage, these are not cheap. So, $1,500 ish for that iPad Pro with a reasonable storage, because if you're doing video editing, and then if you're doing 4K 60, like the file sizes on that are going to be so large so fast that 512 even doesn't necessarily seem like as much as it used to be, right? I mean, you could just record in 1080p if you want to, but even if your output is a 1080p video, you want to probably record in 4K because you can crop down into that. So it might be worth at this point looking at 2 terabytes because of that larger file size on these videos that are now 4K 60 HDR. So, it's over $2,000. And then another, what was it? $1,000. So, it's not cheap. Not a cheap investment to get into. So, but those are my thoughts. I mean, it's like I'll continue to watch the keynote addresses. I'm not like completely done with Apple, but I'm definitely like already looking for alternatives to the Mac Mini because of that. And because this was a separate video, I'll just show this very quickly. So you know what I'm talking about. The Mac Minis, if you go to buy a Mac Mini, they start with, where is it? 8 gigabytes of unified memory, and you cannot upgrade that at any point in the product's life cycle. So if you start out with 8 gigs and you realize later you need some more memory, you cannot upgrade. You have a paperweight. And, so if you need 16, it's like you're really starting at a much higher price than they're trying to say the entry price is. So anyway, I'm already looking for some alternatives on the Mac Mini side. For portability, you can't beat having an iPhone and an iPad, but you can't really do a whole lot of software development on an iPad still. That hasn't really been sorted out. So, you'd need like a Mac as well. I don't know. It's a thing. It's a thing. They're products. They exist. Am I going to upgrade my Apple Watch? No. Am I going to upgrade my iPhone? No. I have to let go of this Touch ID frustration that I have still for that to happen. So those are my thoughts on the keynote address. It was fine. That's basically my response. It's a huge company, it's like they're not gonna, nothing bad is gonna happen from having like a mediocre, or I don't say mediocre, but having a fine keynote address, something that was not, there's nothing unexpected. There's nothing, at this point, everybody knows what the iPhone is. They know what the Apple Watch is. It's just like, at what point in the product life cycle do you want to upgrade your iPhone, and at what point do you want to upgrade your Apple Watch? At what point do you want to upgrade your, iPad if you have one? And besides the camera, personally, that I don't see any reason to upgrade to any of these iPhones and or the Apple Watch at this point. I mean, I guess the Apple Watch is a little more compelling because of that gesture, and because if you do use the Apple Watch on a regular basis, which I do, having a little ability to interact with it with that gesture, hands free, is actually like probably the most compelling feature from this entire keynote address. That's it. Let me know your thoughts on the Apple keynote address, what your thoughts were. What do you think? Are you excited about the iPhones, and are you excited about the Apple Watches, or and what do you think about the keynote addresses? Like, are you kind of seeing what I'm seeing in terms of just like this super corporate, super controlled keynote style? Is that like getting a little bit frustrating? Does it seem a little awkward? Or is it just like, fine, we don't care, it's just typical Apple? Or you have any other thoughts on it? I mean, I can see either way. So that's it for now.